So my name is Javier de la Torre. I'm a little bit tired today because I just came from New York this morning. So sorry if I start kind of like, get a little bit disturbed. But, well, I want to tell you about something that I think is very extraordinary. It's a project that we've been working over the last 1 year and a half. And basically, we're trying to discover new planets. So this is very exciting. Actually, 3 weeks ago, we announced the discovery of the first planet. So that was the 15th of October. It was a publication was published in a scientific journal, and it was greatly publicized. It looked like this. Well, it doesn't look like this. This is an artistic recreation, and it looks more or less the size of Neptune. It's made of gas, pretty far away, and it has something very interesting. It's the first planet that we've discovered that it lives in a 4-star system. So basically, it's a planet that is surrounded, it lives with 4 stars. So if you will be there, you will be seeing 4 stars. So in this picture, you can see like the planet will be this little dot on the bottom on the right. And it kind of like goes over a big planet, a big star, which is the white big star that you can see. Together, it's rotating, it's in a system with this little red star. And together, this system are circulating with these other 2 very far away stars. And it's the first time that we've discovered a planet like this. So this is very exciting. And I want to tell you a little bit how we found it. And this is the topic of my talk. It's called Planet Hunters 1. This is another recreation. And yeah, so first I need to go a little bit over how we discover planets. So there is a project from NASA called the Kepler satellite. It's basically it's a satellite they've sent to an area of the space, and it's looking all the time at a portion of the sky. And what it does is it measures the amount of light that we get from each of these stars continuously. So it's kind of in a stationary place, and it's continuously looking at the same area. It's a portion of the area on the Milky Way, actually. And by doing that, what we obtain is what we call the light curves. So this is the amount of light that we receive, for example, for this star over time. So it just fluctuates. And if you see that there's these drops on the light that you can see on this graph, we call that a transit. And the possible reason for a transit, these reductions on the light, if they're periodic, is that there might be a planet orbiting, it's producing a very, very far away eclipse. So just by knowing, by determining the length of when it happens and so on, you can find how big the planet is, how far it's from the star, etc. So this is how now planets are being discovered. And NASA has been doing great. I mean, so they've discovered already more than, they have more than 2,300 candidates. Publicly announced there's more than 100. So they're discovering planets like crazy. The first planet outside the solar system was discovered in 1988. And since now, I mean, we have so many new planets that we know that are outside. So there's a lot of different sizes of planets. So the Kepler satellite started working in 2009. So if you think like with the light curve, if the planet orbits more than over a year, like for example the Earth around the star, then we will not be able to detect the planet like the Earth until it passes 2 years of measuring the light, because then we will be at least 2 drops on the light. So we're starting now to discover some very interesting planets that actually start looking like the Earth. This is a representation, a visualization created by Torre, and it basically puts all the planets that have been discovered now by NASA and put it like if it was in our solar system. So you can see how big they are, how can they compare to ours. And the more we are starting now to analyze the data, the more that we are starting to discover planets that are similar to Earth. So it's just very, very exciting. Now, NASA does this. Is it perfect? Well, they've discovered a lot of planets, so they're doing great. But our guess here was like maybe it's not so perfect. So what NASA does is they get the data, and they do a lot of analysis. They do data crunching, basically some algorithms. They look at the curve, and they detect where some possible places where there could be those planets. But after 6 months, what they do is something very interesting, is they release the data on the internet. So they say like, well, we're done with all the data crunching. Now we just open it so that anybody can do any research with it. So our guess was there might be other things there that they've missed. Obviously, the NASA cannot look at every single star. There's not a scientist looking at every single of the stars. They just run algorithms and algorithms trying to detect them automatically. So what if we actually will find a different way of doing it? What if we actually show each of these stars to one person? So if we actually look at every single graph, will we find something that they couldn't find before? And so that's what we did. So we started crowdsourcing. The project is called Planet Hunters. And we basically display these light curves to any volunteers that want to help us. And it looks something like this. So it's just like, it's just a light curve, but you can like change how it looks like and so on. But it basically is the light curve. And what you do is that you mark the areas of the transit. If we detect that enough people have marked the same areas, then we know that something is going on there. And that's what we create, is what we call candidates. So we don't discover the planets. What we do is we detect things that actually are rare, or that actually look like potential transits that have been not spotted before. And so far, we have already 34 different candidates. So those candidates are the actual light curves, the stars, that then we tell to the scientists, look, these are the stars that you want to look like. You want to look at different, in particular, because we think there's something interesting there. So over the period of more than 1 year, we have already more than 50 million of those light curves being analyzed. You have to think like every 6 months, no, actually every 3 months, we get new data. So it's a continuous process. And there's been already more than 15 million of those light curves analyzed. And over more than 130,000 participants who have been participating on the project. So it's very, 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 very exciting. Like I said, like the area of the sky that the Kepler satellite is looking is an area on the Milky Way. We have a place on the website where you can see, like, on real time, the classifications that are being done by the users. So you can see, like, this was an event that we organized with the BBC. So over a weekend, we asked as many volunteers as possible to help us to analyze a lot of data. And it was very exciting because the same weekend we found a candidate of a planet that is hopefully will become a certified planet. So this is very, very exciting. So this is the list of candidates. There's, like I said, there's already 36. And the normal way after that, what happens with those is that people also get to discuss. When you finish analyzing one of these light curves, when you just mark the transit, we ask you, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to discuss about it? Do you see something strange here? So you just click on the button, yes, talk. And that's what these two persons did some months ago. And they started looking at these light curves where they saw some very curious transits that were not necessarily periodic. And they started trying to figure out what was going on there. And that was the beginning of the discovery of Planet Hunters 1, the first planet on this 4-star system. So this person started discussing, trying to figure out, engage with the scientists related to the project. And then the scientists actually, by other methods, start looking at the same star and start trying to characterize those planets. So that's what they did. And that's how we got Planet Hunters 1. So obviously that's just great. So we got on the NASA website, we got on the CNN, on the BBC. It was very, very big. It was very, very well announced. I hope you've seen it. It's very, very exciting. And I hope we're going to see much more like that coming on the next months as more and more data gets analyzed. So this is a project of what we call citizen science. So citizen science is something that we're trying to how to say, it's a new way that we're trying to define, to do science, where we get the involvement of citizens to help us to do science. And there's different types of tasks or different things that we can get engaged with the citizens to help scientists to do more things. And there is this organization called the Citizen Science Alliance, from which we are part. It's mainly research institutions, and, well, we are the only company where we try to define how to do good citizen science projects like Planet Hunters. I want to tell you about some others. Their main project is called Universe, is where you can find many projects like that. So you can categorize galaxies, you can find, you can help them to classify them, you can help to classify stormwater. You can find bats. There's a lot of different types of projects that you can do to help scientists. I want to tell you also about another one, which for me is very interesting. We were very deeply involved in it. It's called All Weather. This one is about trying to figure out how was the weather 100 years ago on the oceans. So obviously 100 years ago there was no sensors, there was no machines looking at the weather. But there was a lot of boats, and in those boats there were captains that have to keep a logbook of what was going on every day. So in those logbooks, they had to write like the position where they were, the coordinates, and they wrote also the temperature, the pressure, all these different measurements that are important for measuring what's the status of the weather. Together, they also put other notes, like, like if something happens on the boat and so on. This is all handwritten, and obviously it's very complicated to extract the information. So what we work is that the the Naval History Museum in England digitized all these logbooks from the Royal Navy, and we present it to users to help us to transcribe that information. So basically, you click on the image, you enter the date, then you enter the coordinates, and you can also enter all the information about the weather, and finally some notes. And that's how we digitize this information. And this has been really, really successful. So over more than a year now, we've finished more than 1 million of those pages. There's been a lot of people helping us. And with the data that we've extracted through this way, we are already creating some of these models. So this is, for example, a model from 1911. You see, like the fog areas is the places where we don't have data. But for the others, it's places where we are able to recreate the weather. So this is very interesting to understand how weather has been changing. This is a different visualization. There's other things that you can make with this data. This is a visualization we make with all the boats traveling around during the First World War. And you can see also, like, you can understand other things, like, for example, like how was the traffic changed. Like, there's a moment where the USA enters the war, and suddenly the traffic is starting increasing. So there's a lot of things that you can extract from the data, and very nice visualizations that you can do with it. Now, this is kind of boring. To transcribe this information, so we have to gamify it a little bit. So we did something that it was, the more you digitize on the project, the more you have the possibility to become the captain of the boat. And people love to become the captains of the boat. Really, it was like amazing. So you could, so it was like a really hard task, actually. You had to digitize a lot of pages to become the captain. And there were people that were captains of 13 boats. It's incredible. So it's really like that. There's also like it's sequential. So you go like with the boat and you go day after day. So there were people tweeting saying like, I'm going south with good weather, or I found. So people really getting into the idea of that it was their boat and they were navigating. So it's very, very interesting. Also very interesting is like areas that we didn't count with. So we get like you saw on the right side of those logbooks, we have the notes. So where the captain writes different things. So you can write, for example, they wrote things like if someone passed away, they wrote it there, obviously. And there's people now looking at those notes and trying to find those people, trying to recreate the story, connect with their families. And there's people finding their relatives who passed away on the ocean. So it's a totally new dimension. We went for the data, for the climate data, and we found a community of people trying to find their relatives. It's very, very incredible. So gamification is a huge part of the process. But there's other things. So how do you get millions of boring tasks done? So we've heard today already one possibility, and it's actually paying for it. So there's mechanical Turk. So you can pay what it was, $100, and you get all the videos from TEDx organized. Well, that's one way. But there's other ways. You can motivate people, and you can also play with them. So what we've seen with these different projects is that, well, first of all, some of these projects get a lot of attraction from media. So you have to be aware of and prepare the project to accept a huge amount of traffic from the beginning of the project, where there's going to be a lot of people that want to do something, and they are not very committed, but they're very interested for a few minutes. They're just going to click. So you have to prepare the project to get some immediate rewards for these users, and so that you can make use of these users that are going to come like in masses. But after that, there's going to be like what we call this long tail of people who are like really, really dedicated people. Like I said, like people that can spend days and days digitizing logbooks. And you also have to create your application to kind of like account with that, so that they keep finding challenges and so on. There is also something you have to think about, like you have to compensate what we call the idea of the potential reward that you can get from the project. So, for example, like finding a planet is a huge, it's a huge reward in itself. So you find a lot of people that really just, you don't have to do much. Just give them the tools to actually participate on it, and they will do it. And in others, you have to find other ways. Like, for example, become a captain. It has to game it. You have to try to, like make it something more engaging, something that will be more fun. So this is kind of like this is something that you have to consider to kind of like when you're defining this type of projects. Also very important when you are like working on this type of projects is that you might go, like in the case of our weather was extraordinary, you might go for some type of data, like the climate data, and you might find like a huge community doing research about people who passed away on the oceans. So if you kind of like compensate for this two things, so you got your task, but you give some freedom so that the users can also like find other dimensions to the project, you might find like very, very interesting outputs that you didn't think about. So that's very, very important. And yeah, again, so Planet Hunters 1 was discovered, I think is a great example of how like a very big reward like finding a planet makes people to spend hours and hours in a website. And or whether it's what I would say is, although you can spend hours and hours, there's also, we got motivated a lot of people just because of the idea that they were doing something good. They were helping scientists to understand how was the weather 100 years ago, and they understand that that is important to understand how is climate now. So how to understand the transitions from the different models over time. So kind of like when we try to think about these projects, there's 3 principles that we have to always keep in mind. So the first one is make it cool. It has to look cool. It has to look cool. It has to get engaged with the media. It has to engage with the user when it gets there. It has to be fun. So if it's not fun, just forget it about it. People will just leave. And something very important is that it has to make it matter. It has to be important. And that's something that we really take care. So a principle from the Citizen Science Alliance is that we will not do a project that doesn't end up in science. We don't want to entertain. So every task that is done by a person, every minute that is spent in one of the projects that we do, have to end up in science. And I think that's very, very important. So with that, I think that's all I have today. So I hope you enjoy it. And please go to the website if you want to help some scientists, OK?